Hi, the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian here. Well, we're closing out the month of March, and I thought it'd be another good time to take a look and see what's happening on the sun, what's happening with respect to solar cycle 24. Well, frankly, the sun has been very quiet. It's baffling a lot of solar scientists. This was supposed to have been the year where the solar maximum occurred for this particular solar cycle, with a lot more activity than what we've been seeing. The last several days have been very quiet. This is the very latest solar image, just one sunspot region visible right now, and again it's kind of baffling to scientists. There's some sentiment now that perhaps the solar maximum for this solar cycle number 24 was reached months ago, or perhaps there'll be a secondary peak, a double peak type of max, with an increase coming later on this year. Whatever the case may be, it certainly has been quiet and an underwhelming solar cycle number 24. Here's kind of a broader look at this solar cycle compared to the last solar cycle. Right now we're about in this region right here, kind of below normal, or excuse me, below the predicted values for this particular stage of solar cycle 24. This cycle began about 4 years ago after a long minimum period with a lot of days of spotless conditions on the sun. Now notice this solar cycle is definitely weaker than the prior solar cycle number 23, and that solar cycle was weaker than the prior one, solar cycle number 22, which peaked back in 1990. There's solar scientists that believe that weaker and weaker solar cycles, as we are experiencing right now, could lead to global cooling. In fact, perhaps it's one of the reasons why global temperatures have leveled off over the last several years. It's not just the magnitude of the solar cycle that's important, it's also the length with respect to global temperatures. The longer a solar cycle is extended, some research indicates that leads to cooling in terms of global temperatures, and this is extended way out to the next decade, it looks like. And there are even some solar scientists that are already predicting that the next solar cycle, number 25, will be even weaker than this one, which of course has been weaker than the last one. Well, here is actually a chart that shows predicted values here, and again, it's been an underwhelming solar cycle here, certainly less active than what a lot of solar scientists believe. This was the prediction, and here's where we stand right about now. Again, perhaps there was a peak back in this stage here, back at the end of 2011, towards the beginning of 2012. That in turn may end up being what's considered the solar maximum for this particular cycle, number 24. Or could there be a secondary peak? We'll have to wait and see over the next several months. But all in all, a weak cycle compared to the last one, which was even weaker compared to the one prior to that, number 22, which peaked back in 1990. In fact, this solar cycle right now, solar cycle number 24, is on pace to be the weakest solar cycle in over 100 years, since about 1906. Well, here's another way to look at some of the prior solar cycles. Again, we're right now in this area right here, solar cycle 24. That was weaker than the prior cycle, number 23, which was weaker than 22. And again, the trend is definitely downward for weaker and weaker cycles. Some scientists are already predicting the next cycle, number 25, which should occur next decade, will be even weaker than this. And there are some studies that show that weaker and weaker solar cycles and more extended length solar cycles lead to cooling. So we'll continue to monitor that over the next several months and years to come. Now here's a real long-term look, 400 years of sunspot observations, and again we're in this maximum period now in the last several decades. But notice there were a couple of periods here, one known as the Dalton minimum, and another really incredible minimum period called the Maunder minimum. And both of these had the experience of several decades of weak solar cycles with very little, if any, solar activity over decades at a time. And there's even a few solar scientists out there now are wondering if we're headed towards a minimum period like this. And both of these had very cold global temperatures, known as the Little Ice Age, really, in this particular part of our history here. So we'll continue to monitor this and see where things end up going. But we definitely are in a pattern, it seems, of weaker and weaker solar cycles. Well, one last map I'd like to show here is This is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. The most important ocean on Earth in terms of weather and climate is the Pacific Ocean, the largest ocean by far. And interestingly, it slipped into a cold phase here a few years ago, this particular area right here. So we have the cold phase of the Pacific Ocean, the negative PDO, or Pacific Decadal Oscillation. At the same time, we're in a period of weaker and weaker solar cycles. Again, there's some thoughts out there that all this can contribute to some cooling in global temperatures, maybe even the reason why we've leveled off over the last several years. So we'll continue to monitor this. Both of these are crucial, the Pacific Ocean and, of course, the sun, which is the main driver of all weather and climate, and we'll monitor periodically here at the SIweather.com. That's it for now. I'm the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian.